Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we're going to bring you a preview of an upcoming game called Barbarians, The Invasion by Tabula Games. This is a worker placement kind of dudes on a map, but not really
kind
style
of dudes.
game.
Yeah, it's not. There's not really area control. You're conquering areas for sure, but it's not. There's not a lot of give and take there. And if you haven't noticed, it's big on our table.
Yeah, apologize for the footprint on this game, guys. This is very much a prototype. We have been talking daily with Tabula Games about the overall footprint of the game, but also the look of the game. There's a lot of changes going on, and we'll try to filter some of those changes into the graphics that we overlay on top of this video to show you the difference between what we have in front of us right now and what you guys will be getting when you back the Kickstarter while it's live. So we'll talk about the components as they stand right now. There's 3 different types of boards in the game. You have the main game board, which houses the volcano, the knowledge track. There's 2 tracks that you see here, a barbarian knowledge track and then a tactics. Knowledge track. Across the bottom, the game gets played over 7 different rounds. Each of these rounds is represented by a demon card and then kind of a buffer card in between it. These will take place at the end of each of the rounds, and players will have to do or can do specific things that will signify them getting more resources or them being able to do a special ability on the next round. Around the game board, you have the victory point track, and off to the right-hand side here, you have the honor track. The honor track is used to signify turn order for the next round, but it also allows players to get modifiers and buffers when they pass certain thresholds in honor.
Yeah, little boons as you progress down the track for sure.
Exactly. The second type of game board is the actual map. The map houses 5 different types of islands or continents. The players will all start together in this black area at the top, and they'll progress down through the islands, conquering different regions. Each of these regions holds an innate value victory points that you get when you conquer them. Also, there's 4 different types of factions that you'll be fighting. Each of these factions will be difficult depending upon how well you establish your own armies against them. There are also 4 different types of terrains. Each of these terrains holds a natural type of faction or soldier that you'll have to fight against with rarity depending upon where you fight.
And of course your ability to work your way down through that map also relies on everything that you're doing in the game, because they go hand in hand for sure.
Each of these factions also has a penalty when you aren't able to defeat them. For instance, one of the penalties for one of the factions, if you aren't able to defeat them and conquer them, you have to discard one of your face-up cards in front of you, either be a god or a war chief and so forth. One of them will destroy some of your resources, one of them will destroy some of your soldiers that you've built up and so forth.
Yeah, it rewards careful planning when you're going into the combat, which is nice because this isn't a very luck-based combat. You really can plan for it and achieve what you're wanting to.
Which is fantastic. No dice in this game, which I love. And then each player will have a player board. Now, there will be some stark differences on this player board compared to what you're seeing here. In the bottom right, there will be some variable player powers for each of the different clan factions that you utilize, but they primarily look all the same. You have 5 different resources that you'll be able to manage. Each player will start with a set number of resources in each of these, marked by these tokens. There'll be some really cool miniatures for these in the future, but each player will start with 3 of each of the different resources, and then they're going to start with 2 of each of the different types of soldiers. And these soldiers, again, relate to the places that you're trying to conquer. So you'll need particular soldiers of these 3 to defeat particular different regions on the map, being it mountains or glaciers or swamps. Or
on the player board, they almost represent the types of soldiers or warriors that you're able to take down.
That's right.
Or at least the quantity that you're able to take down.
Each player will have discs in front of them. These will mark their knowledge track, their resources. They'll have banners. Again, these banners will be 3D miniatures in the game that will look like your faction that's on your player board. And then players will have 4 different champions. These are meeples. These are used for the worker placement portion of the game, which is the whole game is centered around, and that's this cool-looking 3D
the volcano
in the center of the board. It is 3 levels high, and it expands out, and each of these different hubs has 6 different regions in it. So there's 6 on the top, 6 on the second ring, and then 6 on the bottom, with some outlying areas being a possible 4th action that you can take. At the very end.
The cool feature here, of course, is the first 2 of these hubs rotate, which is a big part of the game. And it's a very satisfying, sort of almost an old school feel of those old board games where you had something to manipulate. And it really, it's a fascinating impact on the worker placement flow of the game.
Also, there's cards in the game. There are 3 different unique style of cards that you can acquire into your tableau. There's God cards. God cards will allow you to manipulate things on your worker placement action, either before or after you use a worker placement. They allow you to spin the wheel or get extra resources or to gain a soldier and so forth. These will be tapped and used but can refresh at the start of the next round. You have War Chiefs. War Chiefs have 2 functions. The first function is they typically allow you to move your honor along the honor track when you purchase them. But they have a use in war. You can tap them to use a soldier that they produce during a war. You can also discard them permanently to get a very powerful ability. And those can range from things from giving you free upgrades or a 4th worker to use on that round and so forth.
Yeah, you can set up some machines with combinations of the God cards and the War Chief card.
And the last card are your resource cards. There are 4 different types of resource cards. They all give you the 4 basic types of resources. You can tap these at the very start of the round. You can tap as many buildings as you wish, according to how much knowledge you have in the building track. And these are resources that you see here. They always cost goods to buy them, and then they produce resources. But they also work like Stone Age, so they give you victory points at the end of the game depending upon which tracks you've acquired and which shields you've conquered and so forth.
I like the twist, too, that the knowledge track doesn't dictate how many you get to take, but it dictates how many you can actually activate.
So there's 3 phases in the game, and again, to remind you guys, it's played over 7 different rounds. The first phase is called the maintenance phase. At this time, each player in turn order is allowed to tap as many buildings as they wish in front of them. You can have 4 total buildings in front of you, but you can only tap as many buildings as you have your resource track up. And those are going to give you resources on your player board. And then the meat of the game is the player action phase.
Yeah, the player action phase is where you start placing your workers on the volcano. And everyone starts, interestingly enough, at the top of the volcano, and you work your way down. And like Jeremy said earlier, each player natively has 3 workers to use, but there are going to be some potential God cards, even some spaces on the volcano that will allow you to expand that to 4.
And it's important to note that before you place a worker, you can use a God card prior or after that you've used your worker. Now, as David alluded to, you have to place your first worker on the top rung, and then the second one has to be placed on the bottom, but you can only place where it makes sense or when it connects into the other region. So if you guys can see this, we have a blue character that I had placed first here, and then I could place into this region or this region. Most of these regions, minus the top one, have 2 different areas that a player can go to. So you're either going to the left one or the right one. When you go to these things, they give you things like allowing you to buy a new building, allowing you to gather or buy a God card or a War Chief card, or gaining resources, or going to war. There's a variety of different things on there, and the whole game really functions and centers around this.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some interesting things, too, outside of what you'd expect. There are some ones that double your action, you know. So you may be placing a worker at times on this board and not really taking an action as much as you are setting yourself up for another action, either a doubling your next action, or maybe even getting another worker to place in the 4th action round.
Let's talk about the knowledge tracks. These are an important portion of the game. Each of the knowledge tracks, there's a Barbarian knowledge track at the top, which houses 4 different tracks, and then you have a Tactics knowledge track at the bottom. The bottom one directly affects the number of armies that you'll fight in each of the 4 different factions. Everybody will fight always 6 cards in a particular region. So if I'm fighting somebody in the forest and I don't upgrade that particular faction, so say for instance I'm fighting this guy here and I don't have an upgrade on this location, I'm going to be fighting 6 cards. The further you go down in that, the less cards you have to face, and also the more potential of victory in conquering that location for the player. Each of those work in the exact same way.
It's just for the 4 different factions, so you can take a look at the map, kind of maybe plot your course, see where other people are going, and go heavy in one category and try to work your way down towards the bottom of the map through just that faction, maybe a couple. And then there's other people who will go up a little bit in all of them just so that they can sort of, you know,
have more diverse ways to conquer stuff. At the end of each of these tracks, the first 2 players to get to the 4th spot in every single track of these allows them to get a bonus. the first and the second player, and that's right next to that area here. Let's talk about the knowledge track up here. The first track is shipping, which allows you to kind of expand out further down the islands. You are only able to conquer on the first island if you have no shipping, but as you go further in, all the way to D would allow you to conquer down there. We'll talk about war in just a second, how this all works together. Shields will negate any penalties that you take during war. The feast track here will allow you to gather additional resources when you gather resources from the volcano. And then, of course, we've mentioned the building a couple times. Let's talk about war. Because when you go to war, you are going to a very particular position. There's 3 different positions on this track right now that allow you to go to war. When you go to war, the very first thing that you are allowed to do is you're allowed to buy more soldiers. As we stated, everybody will start with 2 in each of these different tracks. But below each of these soldiers, you can buy more by removing resources and moving that soldier thing up. The importance behind that is that each of these regions houses a very particular type of enemy that you have to fight. So you're basically matching the different types of soldiers that you have compared to the soldiers that the region has.
Yeah, the planning and strategizing for how to approach war is pretty significant. Like Jeremy said, you're going to be needing to, for instance, gather the resources you need for buying those soldiers for a particular area. You might want to also then, like we said earlier with the tactics board, pump a lot of points into a particular route there, thereby really setting you up for an easy win. Now, on the flip side, you can actually take a chance and go at a deck of cards, if you will, with not a lot of strength, but you might draw well. But that's where there's no dice, like Jeremy said, but these decks of cards for all these different factions have varying numbers of enemies. Some of them might be 1. Some of them might be 3 enemies, and then, as you've said before, 3 potential enemies that you can defeat for bonuses.
Yeah, go ahead and flip up the top forest card there, and let me show how this actually works. When you're facing a particular region, there's a couple rules, and when you go to war, you have to be adjacent to that region, number 1. So at the start of the game, each player is located in here, meaning that the only 3 places they can fight are these 3 different adjacent locations. The second rule is you have to be able to get there by shipping lanes. So I can only fight on the first island if I have no shipping in here. However, I can fight down to the second island if I have a 1 shipping, and so forth as you go. The third thing is you cannot conquer or fight in a region that someone has already conquered, right? So when you go to that region, you're going to fight the number of cards depending upon how well you've have knowledge in that particular faction that you're fighting. You're going to flip over the first card. Whatever you see on there, you have to reduce that soldier on your player board by that many. And you'll keep going through that stack of cards, defeating those soldiers and reducing your forces. If at the end of it you have beaten more than half, rounded up, of the cards that you face, you've conquered the region, which allows you to place one of your conquer tokens in that region and get the victory points that are required from that region. Some of these cards also give you bonuses, so everyone that you've fought, you get a bonus at the bottom, and some of them even have red factions at the bottom, which are optional. You don't have to face these, but if you do, you will immediately get the victory points for them when you face them. So there's some options in there in trying to acquire victory points quickly. At the end of the round, you have one last thing. You have the end phase. The end phase, each player will go through these, the first location and then the second and so forth, at whatever round it's affecting. If it is a demon, each player has to pay 1 gold or lose 5 victory points, and then they have an option to do a special ability on the bottom of those cards. The other ones allow you to either gain 2 resources or to pay a particular number of resources to get victory points. And then each of those will also turn the wheel in a particular way.
Exactly. So it sets up the next round a little differently. This wheel changing is pretty significant. And not only does it change when this happens, but as we alluded to earlier, there are some god cards that come into play that give players the power to change that, which is a really huge part of the take that, if you will, in this game.
The game ends in one of 2 ways. If at the end of the 7th round, the game will end, or if any player during the game, no matter what round it is, reaches 100 victory points, that will trigger the end of the game. Of course, they'll play to the end of the round, and then they'll score up their victory points. Victory points are basically scored from wherever you are on the track, times any of the multipliers from your game end cards, from your resources that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this game looks like it has a lot going on.
Yeah.
And it does, particularly this prototype we have, looks a little intimidating. But as we say with many games, once you get playing this, the flow really starts to make sense. It's also the kind of game where you can get your points in a variety of different ways.
Yeah.
We've talked to the designers, and they've shared with us they've had some games where people aren't really filling out the map too much at all. And I found in my plays, there are some other places to score some points. Like Jeremy alluded to, some of those architecture cards have some end game scoring, and if you really collect those wisely, you can get a lot of points from those. So I always like that in a game like this, where I can kind of be the pacifist a little bit. I don't think you
can be a real pacifist in this game.
Not in a game called Barbarians.
Yeah. One of the other cool things I forgot to mention is during war, when you branch off, you're basically one large barbarian horde. The whole group is one horde, but you're fighting for your own clan. So you can extend off of locations to fight through adjacency from anybody's location. So if someone's conquered a particular location, you can fight from that location to any of the surrounding areas.
Yeah, which becomes important because everything triggers off of this volcano. So when you're going to war, there's no war phase. As Jeremy said, some of the spaces on here allow you to go to war. But if other players take those for the first couple rounds and you're still up at the first island, at least you've been able to develop your shipping so that you can sort of leapfrog ahead and get some of the juicier points later in the game.
Again, remind you guys, this is a prototype. A lot of the stuff that you see here, the artwork even, a lot of it's changing. We've seen some of the artwork. We'll throw some of it up. It looks really, really fantastic. Look nice. It should be on Kickstarter by the time you guys see this video. Make sure you guys back it. Subscribe to us, of course. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Everything else that we do here at Man vs. Meeple, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.